All right. Hey, everybody. Hope you're all having a good Friday. So, today we're going to talk a little bit about Ampt data and maybe show you a couple of other new things that we've got going on with Ampt as well. This is the first time streaming with a couple new things that I've got set up here, so hopefully we'll be able to figure out comments and bring some of that stuff in. So I don't know if the comments are coming into the software that I'm using, but we're going to hopefully figure that out. I believe we are live on Twitch and YouTube and Twitter. I should check that actually. Let's do that. Let's see. Are we live actually? Let's go to Twitter here. I actually need to turn my volume down because I can hear me in the background. All right, let's try this. Twitter. Oh, this might not be logged in here. It won't be. Hold on. Okay. Okay. I don't know if we're live on Twitter, but we should be live on. We're definitely live on YouTube and probably LinkedIn. So, anyways, all right, let's get started. Hopefully, comments will work and we'll be able to bring on some comments and answer some questions so that we'll be able to interact with you. All right, so let's get started. So, if you're unfamiliar with Ampt, Ampt is basically a service that allows you to write application code and deploy applications directly to AWS. So we're not a PaaS, we're not hosting your applications for you, we're deploying them directly to AWS. We will host or maintain the AWS accounts for you, which is a nice feature. That way you don't have to worry about setting up accounts or configuring permissions or doing any of those things. So we've got a whole bunch of different options. That if you're interested in using Ampt and using it to build faster, that would be, please feel free to reach out to us, hello@getampt.com or DM us on one of our social channels. Just a couple of things. We do have some amazing customers right now that are using Ampt. They are doing some pretty fascinating things. They're mostly small teams that can build and deploy things quickly without having to worry about configuring all that stuff on AWS and setting up all those accounts and doing those sort of things. So anyways, let's jump over to the documentation because the main thing I want to talk about today is the Ampt data module. So essentially what the Ampt data module is, and let me just zoom in a little bit here. Gonna make this a little bigger. So the Ampt data module is an abstraction on top of DynamoDB. And the way that Ampt works is that it's what we call infrastructure from code, where essentially you just write application code, and then from that we figure out exactly what it is that you need for the infrastructure behind the scenes. So what's nice about this data module is when you import this into your application code, this goes ahead and actually makes sure that there's a database table created for you for DynamoDB, but we want to make it really, really easy to interact, and we don't want to lock you in a sense to DynamoDB, so we want to give you an abstraction that's fairly simple to use or fairly simple to understand so that you don't have to interact directly with the AWS SDK. Not that there's anything wrong with that, and if you know how to do that, you can absolutely do that, but the goal here is really to make it super simple for you to build applications very, very quickly and go from there. So a couple of sort of main points of the data module, and we'll get into this. We'll actually we'll start building some stuff, play around with it. Is that the data is just there. You don't have to set anything up. It's already configured for you. We give you sort of a default configuration of a DynamoDB table, so that includes on demand, so you don't have to worry about setting provision capacity or provision throughput or any of those things. It's just taken care of for you. As your application grows and you need more capabilities, those are things that we can adjust for you, and things that we're working to automatically adjust for you so that it optimizes your data patterns for you and optimizes the compute that it uses behind the scenes in order to make that work. So you have sort of three basic operations when it comes to data. Those are get, set, and remove. And maybe if this works here, doesn't look like my my zoom is working, but I maybe can draw her on the screen here. So we have this these sort of get, set, and remove that we can use in order to interact with the data. If you know DynamoDB and you're thinking about, well, what about update item versus maybe some of the other options that you have there, we actually try to combine all of those into these very, very simple abstractions, and I'll show you a little bit more about how that works in a minute. All right, so if we scroll down here, basically we install the Ampt data package in our Ampt application, and then we bring it in using just importing it. These are all ESM modules or ES modules, and then you can just do these sets and gets in order to get the data. So pretty straightforward. So why don't we do this, and we can try to see how this works, and then maybe go through some of these other options that are here. So I'm going to jump over to VS Code. I have an empty directory here just set up called data demo, and I'm just in the terminal view here. So let's go ahead and run the Ampt command. You can install Ampt globally, the Ampt CLI, just at ampt/CLI, install that. I'm going to go ahead and select my demo organization here. You can have multiple organizations within Ampt. So if you have maybe you have one for your business, for the business account. Maybe you have multiple business accounts that you want to use, multiple organizations that you want to work across. Maybe you want to have a personal account and so forth. You can have all your apps separated into different organizations here. All right, so first thing we need to do is we need to create an app. So let's go ahead and hit yes. I'm just going to go ahead and start with let's do the JavaScript API Express. So this is just an Express app. Nothing fancy here, but we'll start with this, and let's call this data demo. All right, so as soon as I hit that, you'll notice that over here on the right-hand side, this is going to generate a couple of files for me. These are just the basic files in order to run an application. So we'll see that we've got our index file over here. This is our main file that we are going to put all of our code in, or this is going to be the entry point. So we don't have to put all of our code in there. We can import additional information into that, or additional scripts into that, different modules and so forth, so that we can set our code up in different ways. But pretty straightforward in terms of this just being a, let me just move this down a little bit. Pretty straightforward in terms of this being a Express app. You create Express, you set up a router, you build some routes around that, and then sort of the little bit of magic that we add with Ampt is in order to expose this app, this Express app, to the web, we have to actually do something that exposes it. Normally you would do an app.listen. If you were using something like serverless HTTP or Lambda API, you'd be using sort of a different way to sort of expose that app. All you do here is import HTTP from the Ampt SDK, and then you can just do this http.node.use, and that will go ahead and expose it to the internet for you. So pretty straightforward. So essentially what this has done now that this is just takes a few seconds to do this, but we have now created an app that is in our demo organization. We called it data demo, and we have a URL here. So if I click on this URL and open up this app, I am actually accessing a live version of this application right now in my developer sandbox. So this is all running in the cloud. This is using all cloud resources. Everything is sort of production parity, right? Gives you that high fidelity sandbox. So if we want to go and actually look and see what what our API is doing, this right here is a static page. One of the features that we have in Ampt is this static folder. So anything you put in this static folder will just be published and served from the CDN, served from a CloudFront distribution. So it's pretty powerful if you just want to host static websites. It's really, really great for doing things like 11T or any SSGs. Next and Nuxt and Astro and all those other ones are supported as well if you want to do SSR. But this is just a really great way to generate those static files and have them serve super low latency and have them distributed around the globe using a CDN. So anyway, so this is just a regular HTML file here that loads the information, says a placeholder to get started and so forth. What's very cool about the way that Ampt works is, again, everything is running in the cloud. So if I want to make a change here, so this says this is the placeholder. Let me just make this a little smaller here. So we see that this says this is a placeholder. So if I go in here and I change this code, which I then just lost, I'll say Ampt is the best, because we all know that to be true. So as soon as I save this, this will go ahead and sync my code. So over here, if I refresh this, we'll now see that the change has been made instantaneously to this cloud sandbox. And this is more than just for static files. This is also for anything dynamic that's running behind the scenes. So let's take a look at that, and then we'll get into some of the data stuff. So in the index file here, we have this route. It's saying api.get on hello. This is basically mounting it to /API. A very cool thing about Ampt, by the way, is you can mix and match dynamic and static files. So we know which static files we need to load. We create a manifest that's automatically mapped at the edge for you. So you can mix and match dynamic routes and static routes. You don't have to say like, well, everything past API will be dynamic. And you could actually build things on the /API route that we're loading static things as well. So you can mix and match those, which is pretty cool. So essentially, this is going to put any of these API requests are going to be on the /API route. So if we go here and just do /API/hello, we will get, this is a message from the public API. Make that bigger. We have this greet one. So if we were to say API/greet/Jeremy like this, hello Jeremy. So pretty straightforward. And then the really cool thing about this again is if we wanted to change something, like so this greet one replies back hello, we can change this to hi. Save this. This is synced. We refresh this, and it's immediately available for us. So super quick way to work. Very, very easy to just build things very fast and not need to emulate anything locally. All we're running locally is just our static. Just our CLI. Right? It was a very lightweight CLI running behind the scenes. Gives us this sort of interactive terminal mode here. Okay, so let's go ahead and do something with data because that's a little bit more interesting. All right, so I'm going to copy. Well, first thing I got to do is I have to install Ampt data. So I will copy this, come over here and install Ampt data. You can install things right through the interactive terminal here, so you don't have to open another window in or whatever. And if you're using Yarn or something like that, it'll automatically detect that and install it using the right package manager for you. So I'm just using npm behind the scenes here. Simple enough. All right, so the data package is installed. So the next step we want to do is go ahead and import data like this. So I will put that up here, import the data, and then we actually want to be able to do something. So if we just tried to run await data.get or something like that, this isn't going to produce anything for us yet. So we actually want to set some data. There's another video that I put out last week that shows you how you can do tasks. You can run some tasks locally. So we're going to do a little bit of that too to make this a little bit easier as well to just experiment. But I want to show you how you can load them from the API first, and then we can start exploring the data through some of the other methods that we can run these scripts. So I've done this here. So let's go ahead and use this hello route here. And rather than, let's do that. So we're going to make this async like that. All right. So right now we're doing a data.set foo bar, and essentially the way that this works is the first part of this is the key. So this is how you're going to access the data in the future. So there are complex keys and or compound keys, and there are just regular sort of simple keys. So you can mix and match these in Ampt data. So this automatically manages how it's writing the data to DynamoDB behind the scenes for you. So let's say that I had something super simple. I just wanted to, or actually, you know what we're going to do? Let's do this, and this way we'll have some dynamic data in here. So I'm going to go ahead and change the greet one here. I'll make this async, and then we get a name in, and then what I'm going to do is I'm going to set name here, and I'm going to make this equal to the value of name. All right, so what will happen here is when this runs, it'll say hi, whatever we put in there, and then it will also save that name to the and actually, I'll put this down here so that we can catch that as well. So we're not going to return anything from this. We're just going to have it set the name. So let's go ahead and run that route again. So we'll come over to here, and we'll do greet Jeremy, and I'll do a capital J so that it looks a little better. And we'll run that, and this will go ahead and return back for us. Oh, I guess it didn't because I used lowercase there. So why did that? What did I do? Or did it automatically change to lowercase? No, it's automatically changed to lowercase. Maybe can't put a capital in there. Anyway, so hi Jeremy, this ran. So we didn't get any confirmation that the data was written or anything like that. But what's really cool as well is we could actually do a little bit of logging. So if we wanted to see this, now we can check this in the dashboard, and we'll do that in a second. But if we just want to see sort of what happened, we can go ahead and run const, and I'll call this data result. And this will equal that, and then we can go ahead and log that out. So we'll just say data result and data result. Okay, perfect. What did I do wrong? Oh, got an extra thing there. Okay, so we saved that there. So this is synced. This is already there. So now I'm going to refresh this, and let's say Jeremy 1, so we see that the data is different. So this says Jeremy 1, and then here we get this HTTP log that tells us that data result was Jeremy 1. So we now have confirmation that this was written to the database. So how do we check this besides just getting that confirmation? Well, we can query the data using a get. So let's do that first. So back over on the documentation here, we see that you can get data just by doing data.get. So let's go over to our hello, and we're going to do const result await data.get. Now we're looking for the name value. Now this can work as a basic key value store, which is actually pretty powerful if you just need to save simple bits of data. It's a lot more that you can do with it, but let's start here. So I'm going to go ahead and retrieve the name, and by default, again, as a key value store, the goal here was just to return the data exactly as it is. There's a bunch of metadata that's associated with it. We can go ahead and display that as well, which I'll show you in a minute, but let's start with just the data piece. So we now have data written, and we want to say hello from the public API, or we maybe want to say, let's do this. Let's change this to template, and we'll say hello result. Not results. Yeah, results. Sorry. Yeah, results from from the public API. I don't think that's proper English, but that's fine. So now what should happen is we've already written this thing we've already written Jeremy 1 to the table. We want to go ahead and now display this as a separate route for /hello. So I'm going to leave this route or this page open. I'll switch over to another one, and I'll go ahead and change this to hello. Now this says hello Jeremy from the public API. So it looks like this is still loading the first one. Let me refresh this here. That should have. There we go. So essentially what this is doing is this is allowing us to write something here. So we can say hello Ampt and run this, and then that will save, and then we refresh this over here, and that will run that. So all we're doing is simply saving data and then retrieving data. So that's it, by the way. This DynamoDB table already set up for you. You didn't have to do anything then essentially import this module and then run these simple commands, and it's there. So you have all of this stuff that's automatically set up for you and pretty easy to use. So lots of powerful things you can do with that. The other thing I do want to show as well is maybe if we jump into the dashboard. So you just type open, by the way. You can go to ampt.dev and log in that way. But if you're in a particular app, you just type in open within the CLI. You hit open. This will pop open a new window. It's going to ask me to log in because I must not be logged in here. So I will log in. I'm logged in. Here's my data demo, and this is my personal sandbox that's here. So I click into this personal sandbox. I have all of these different options in here. These are all isolated just to this sandbox. So my data, my storage, the tasks, the logs, all of that stuff is isolated here. So if we click on data, we get our data manager. It's pretty straightforward, meant to sort of, it's not, hopefully not as complex as the AWS console one. It doesn't give you all the features, but gives you enough to look around and start poking around with your data. So if I hit get all items, this will go ahead and show me the record that is called name, the key of name, and it has a value of Ampt. So within here, we could change this. So if I wanted to update my data and say Jeremy here and then hit save, so this will now be updated as Jeremy. If I go back over to this route and refresh, then I'm getting the updated data. So pretty straightforward, set and get for simple values. Makes it really, really easy to build some sort of simple application pretty quickly. Okay, so let's get more complex. So the thing that's really cool about data that goes beyond just this idea of sort of the key value, and this sort of is where it talks about the single value things here. And again, you can store more than just a string. So if you did want it to be stored as a number or as a Boolean or as an array, it will store those as JavaScript, the correct JavaScript type, so that when it returns it, it will be a number or a Boolean or an array. So you don't have to cast those or convert those to a different type. It'll actually save those and return those directly from the service for you. But where it gets a little bit more interesting is when you start building more complex structures. So you can store as deep or as complex structures as you want to. Those can be a mix of strings and numbers and Booleans and arrays. You can do nested structures as well. So it allows you to do more complex things beyond just doing a straight string. So let's jump over to our code again for a second, and let's write something a little bit more complex. And actually, what I'm going to do here is you've seen how the API works. It loads it from the URL. That's fine. That's how you would build your application. But if we want to build something a little bit, if we want to just experiment more with it, so I can show you some more of these concepts, a very cool feature that we've added recently to Ampt is the ability to run scripts directly from your CLI. You could run them from the package.json and run those by setting up scripts within the script section here, but we've made this even easier that we have automatic loader, so it would actually run TypeScript and JavaScript for you. So let's do this. I'm just going to create a simple file, and I'm going to call it data, or I'm just going to call it tests. I'll call it data tests.js, and I will save this. So I now have this file here, and if I type in log and say this is my data test file like this, and save this. Now from my CLI, I can just type in run and then data test.js. And this will go ahead and say that it's missing something. Oh, because I typed it wrong. So it's data tests.js. Run this, and this will go ahead and say this is my my data test file. Now, the cool thing about scripts, when you run scripts through the CLI or you run them as a script that's part of the NPM package, this will run them in the Ampt context. So the really, really nice feature of that is I can import any of my SDKs or modules into one of these script files, again, just JavaScript or TypeScript, and then I can interact with my remote environment just from my local machine running these test files. So like I said, I have a whole other video I just put out on that. Gives you the ability to do migrations or just run tests or test different handlers. Very, very cool, very, very easy to use. So what we can do with this is we can actually just create, let's say const result here, and we'll await data.getName, and then we will go ahead and log the results like this. So this is a local file. This will never run on my server. server. I mean, most of it's all serverless behind the scenes. But so this won't run anywhere other than just my local machine. But this gives me the capability where I can interact now with these resources like data directly from my local machine. So I'm going to run this. This will go ahead and access my remote sandbox and then bring that data down to me. And as you can see, it's spitting out the results of name. Okay, before we get into objects, let me just show you something quickly. So one of the things that we can do with data, and if we jump over to, let's see, make this a little smaller. We want to do under getting items. So it shows you pretty simple. We'll get into collections in a minute, but I want to show you this table here. So this is the options table for the get of a data or of an object. So one of the important things here is this meta object, right? This is just a Boolean, and what this does is rather than returning that straight string or number or whatever is saved as that simple value, this will actually return back more information about it, including when the item was created, when it was modified, and then if there's any other metadata associated with it. Let's not worry about limit and reverse and those sort of things yet. So let's go back over to our code. And let's, where was I? Go back over to our code and let's go ahead and add that meta flag in here. So all we have to do is just create an object as the second parameter here, and we type in meta and true like that. So now if we run this again, I'll just make this a little bigger. If we run this again, this will go ahead and do the same exact query, but this time it'll bring back the metadata. So now we can see what the key was, what the value was, when it was created, and when it was modified. This is important because we can use this, especially when we start querying collections, when we're bringing back multiple items. We might want to know what the key is. We're going to obviously want to know what the value is, and some other data around it. Okay, so let's get a little bit more complex here. Let's show actually writing a more complex object to the database. So we'll do the const results again here, and then this time we will await a data.set. So same idea with the name. So the name always has to be, or the key always has to be a string. So we're just going to call this object test. As the name of our of the key that we're saving here, and then we're going to write an object that's a little bit more complex. So this is actually filling in a bunch of stuff for us. Thank you, Copilot. So it just assumes John Doe, age 30, living in the city of New York in USA. So let's save this, and we're still dumping out the results there. So we'll go ahead and run this, and this should pop back and tell us that it has written this information to the database for us. Now again, what's nice about set and get is we tried to make sure that they were very similar in terms of options and things that you can do. So if you want to just return, and by the way, you don't have to return this data. This is just a confirmation that the data was written and exactly what was written to the database. So this can be helpful if maybe you generate some sort of object and then you need to use that object immediately after that within a result or something like that, that you can actually return that object from the data to know that it was written correctly, and then use that object that way, just a confirmation again that it was written. And then if it wasn't written, then you could fail and have some sort of error flow to point that out. But if you did want to bring back the metadata here, then you can use meta true here as well. So if we were to go ahead and run this again, we'll see that we get the key, which is object test, that value, which again is already serialized or already decoded as a JavaScript object for you, and then the created and the modified date there as well. And again, you see that 30 is stored as an integer for you, right? So it's a number, so that you can maintain the types here. And of course, this is super helpful if you're using TypeScript and you're typing the different objects or items that you're writing to the table. Okay, so we've created now an object in the database called object test, And again, if we were to go over to our system here, to the dashboard, we'll see that there is an object test. We can jump in here and see all the data that we have associated with this. Okay, so now let's just see some of the things that we can do with actually querying this data. So I'm gonna comment this out for a second, and then I'm going to use this, and we'll just get object test here. Just to confirm. So we'll run it again, and we should get back this same object that we just saved because we are in fact pulling the metadata back. Just a shortcut, by the way. There's a whole bunch of options that you can put in. I showed you some of them just quickly on the docs there, but there's a whole bunch of options you can put in, but you don't need to actually specify it like this. We built a simple shortcut where if you just type in true here, this essentially assumes that by true you mean that you want to get the metadata back. So if you run that with true, you'll get the same result as if you do meta true. But if you want to put additional options in, then you would have to specify the object and put the whole thing in there. Okay, so I'm going to get rid of this here and save this, and then just go ahead and run it again. So we should just get this single object back with country, age, and so forth. All right, so a couple of things about manipulating data now. So I want to be able to update parts of this object, but I don't want to have to specify the entire object every single time. So what's very cool about DynamoDB is it has, in its update API, it'll do partial updates. So you can actually specify just the things that you want to update, and it will go ahead and update those for you. So here's where things get, I think, pretty cool. So let's take this const results again here, and I'm going to, actually we'll do it, I'll leave that one intact, but I'm going to do this way with the separate one so that we can see it. All right, so I want to set this object again, object test. I'm going to set this. All right, now, what do I actually want to write to this? So let's say that I want to write a new value to this, all right? So I'm happy with country, city, name, and age. I don't want to worry about those. All I want to do is make a small change to a bit of data. Or let's start here. Let's say I want to add a new field within this object. So what would it be? Let's say, I don't know, age. Let's say we'll say title here. So we'll add a title for John Doe, and his title is Cloud Developer. Okay, so what we're doing is we're setting object test. This already exists, but by default, when you set an item, it does a merge. Okay, so it's going to be an upsert that's going to bring those two things together. So if I save this here, and I'm not going to bring back the metadata, I'll just bring back just this content here. If I go ahead and I'll leave that one so we can see the difference, I'll go ahead and run this, and that will spit back the same exact information with the title added. Okay. That's cool. That way we don't have to always send in the same data. We don't even have to worry about what data, what data is already in there. All we know is that we want to update, a part of that data, or we want to add a new field to that data. All right. So now let's say that I wanted to update a piece of data. Well, title already exists. So let's say that I want to say that John Doe is a senior cloud developer. So I can save this, and now I can run this again. I'll just clear this out so we don't have all that extra junk. Sometimes we get this little listener error. This is just a sort of weird node thing, but we would like to fix that and see if we can make that work. Let me try to run it again. So we'll run that again, and essentially what we get now is the same exact data, but with just the title updated. Okay, let's say that we lose, or that John Doe loses his job, or is changing positions, and so he's no longer a senior cloud developer, and we don't even need that title field in there anymore. There's a couple different things that we can do. So one is that we want to make it really, really easy to delete individual parts of something. So if you go in and just simply set the title as null, like this, and then you run that same exact query again, that will update the data and it will remove that value for you. So now we no longer have the title value in there. If you were to just delete the object, you would remove the entire object, right? So we only want to delete parts of it. So we can either do that with null, Let me go ahead and just add back in, I'll just say developer. So we will run this. So this will add him back as a developer here. So we did null last time. You can also specify undefined, and that should do the same exact thing and remove his title. So some people, sort of a debate in the DynamoDB community. Some people like to store their null values. Some people don't like to store their null values. I'm in the no null value camp. This is a NoSQL database. If a value doesn't have to be in there, if you're literally storing that this value or this attribute has no value, then the problem is that that you're just wasting space in your index, and it's not doing you any good. It's probably better on from an application standpoint to say this value or this attribute doesn't exist, therefore I assume it's null. So there is an option where you can turn on save nulls, but by default, nulls and undefined will remove values from objects that you have stored in there. Okay, so this is sort of just a sort of a simple maintenance thing, but there's other things that you can do with data that go beyond just simple updating and removing. And again, if you wanted to remove this, I can show you it's just data.remove, and you specify that, and that will go ahead and remove it for you. But I want to get into some of the other sort of cool things that we've added to data to make it easier for you to maintain and do some interesting things there. So let's start actually with, and we can, there's pagination built in, there's a whole bunch of stuff like that. There's the ability for you to sort of just bring back, we'll get into collections in a bit. I know I don't want this to run for too long. We've already been talking for almost 40 minutes, so I don't want to take too much, but I do want to show you some cool things that you can do. So there are atomic counters that we built in, and the way that atomic counters work is it allows you to update a value atomically, which means that if you're like doing a counter or you're trying to deduct inventory or something like that, if you have a whole bunch of requests coming in at the same time, like for example, we could maybe demonstrate this. So let's say that let's do something like this. Let's do age, and we'll set his age to 31 here. And then the other thing we'll do, let's see if we can do it in a promise. Can I do this in a promise.all? Let's see. Hold on. If I do, I think this is the right way to do it. We do promise.all, and we will run await.dataset on object test. I guess we don't have to run await, right? Remember how to program in JavaScript here. I think we can just do this, right? So we'll, if I'm wrong here, it's just because I never use promise.all anymore. All right, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to object.test data. Need that there. Okay, let's try this. And it doesn't like that and like that. Okay, I think this will work. All right, so we will, and I think I need to await this so that will do what it needs to do. Okay, so let's try this and see what happens. Okay, so what I'm trying to do here is I want to run these two updates to the same object at the same time. Should run in parallel. One of them is going to finish before the other one. I'm assuming it will be 32, but I'm not sure, so it could be either one. But essentially, if I run this, this is going to cause some sort of race condition where they're both going to be competing, and last write wins. That's just how these types of databases work, which I think makes sense. So let's go ahead and run this. Hopefully it doesn't fail. It's writing both of those things, and then it came back and it said age 32. Let's run it again and see what happens. Age 31, right? So this is where it's whichever one finishes last is the one that's going to work. So if we're trying to write to the same object and overwrite the same value with different values, there's no way for it to know what am I supposed to do. So this is where atomic counters come in, and it's a pretty handy feature. So the way that this works is we would say we can use this data.add, and this gives us the ability, and with nested objects as well, we can do it that way. This gives us the ability to update a value incrementally, to increment or decrement that value, and do that in a way that is always going to be always going to work, or it's always going to be atomic, right? So it's always going to be in the right order here. So or it'll basically run through them so that it works. Now again, this is probably a bad example showing that it's a data.set because I'm not trying to increment the value. But let's say that he's getting older, or it's inventory or something like that. And sorry, my Siri kicked on here. I hate when that happens. So anyways, so let's do it a little bit differently here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to get rid of actually I guess I could keep the promise.all, and rather than .set, we're going to do add like this, and the way that this works, by the way, is if you're using a nested value, is you would specify the object and then the value within it. If it's a simple value and it's just at the root level of it, you can just use just the name and then the value that you want to increment or decrement. If you're using a nested object, you would do it this way. So I'll go over here and we'll specify age. Age as the value we want to change, and then get rid of that, and we'll do the same thing here. So age, comma 32. So now this is an add. So this actually isn't, we wouldn't want to do 31 and 32 here, because if we're trying to increment the age, right? So we want him to go from being 30 years old to 31 years old to 32 years old. So we just want this to increment by 1 every time, like this, and then this will guarantee that at the end his age is set to 32. Or at least it should. So let's go ahead and do this first. I'm going to comment this out. And I'm going to go ahead and reset his age to 30, like this. And now one of the things that's also interesting is that DynamoDB, and by default, the way that we're writing to DynamoDB, these aren't consistent reads, or consistent writes. So the way that it works is that you do potentially have to wait for the data to update. Again, it's usually very, very fast, but you do have to wait for that data sometimes. So I'm going to refresh this, and this is going to run this, and then it queries it back, and it is read correctly as 30. Okay, so now we know that his age is 30 and set correctly. I'm going to comment this out. I'm going to hit clear here. This time it should just run to query his age. So we know that it's 30. Okay. So now we want to run these two promise.alls that are running at the same time, right? But the goal here is to make sure that we increment this so that we get to 32. So we're saving it here, and we'll go ahead and hit clear, and then we will run this. This should run both of those. If it's possible that his age came back, okay, it did come back as 32, might be possible because of the slight delay there that it wouldn't come back on that first get request. But it's usually so fast it doesn't matter. But this way we can guarantee that it's going to be 32. Now, if we were to run this again, this is just going to increment it more. So now it should come back and he should be 34, and again should be 36, and so forth. So John is a software developer in New York City, so it does make sense that he would be aging that quickly. Okay, so that's just something that's interesting there. It's a nice little feature of it, gives you a way to sort of control things within the system. There is also another thing that we can show quickly, which is, if you can find it over here. Oh, and by the way, if you did want to update multiple values, there is a way that you can do this. So you set the object, you do the same thing with set here, but then what you do is you actually build out your object the same way you would if you were just writing an object, and then you can use this add keyword as a little object under each one, and specify either a positive or a negative integer, and that will do that for you. So you don't have to have multiple writes to it in order to make something like that work. Okay, where's the other thing I wanted to show you though? I'll make sure that we've got it here. So it is defaulting information, and I know that there is something here. Setting default values. Okay, so there's a couple, actually, another thing I can show you too. This is one of those things where if you were writing data and you only want to write the data if the object doesn't exist, you can do an existence check. So this is nice because essentially what you do is you say, does it exist or does it not exist? And exist false means that it will fail if the key already exists. And then exists true means that it will fail if the key doesn't exist. So this is actually an interesting way that you can say, all right, maybe I want to write a new user record for a username, but I am only writing that record if that user doesn't exist. And then there's another way to say, well, I actually want to write that record if the user does exist. That's the only way I want to write that record. So I don't want to create a new record. And this is super helpful. Let's say that you were maybe writing a new user record, right? And so you had a whole bunch of data that you wanted to write along with the user. Then when you go to write that to the database, you might have maybe their IP address that they signed up with. Maybe there's like a bio or a photo or some of those things. And then, so you want to make sure that no user exists before you write that data, perhaps. So the first time you say, okay, only write this data if this record doesn't exist. But then let's say that you're making some other incremental change, maybe is like a webhook that gets triggered or something, and then that says, oh, this was for this particular username, so go ahead and write update some information on that user record. You only want to write that information if the user exists, because again, the way that upserts work is that it would go ahead and write that anyways, even if the rest of the record didn't exist, and then you'd have an incomplete user record. So just something there that is really handy to do. And then speaking of sort of when you're writing a new record and you're not sure what you want to have as part of that record, the idea of using default values is a really, really cool capability. So I want to show you that quickly because that does add a lot of power to working with this. It gives you default values when you're writing to a table. So if I go back to this here, we can comment this out. All right, so let's go back to our John example up here. So I'm going to comment this out as well. And let's make this a little bit smaller so we can see. So let's uncomment this. All right, so that's result. We're dumping the results down there. Okay, so let's write this record again. We'll get rid of the meta true here. Send this in as a empty object or no object at all, actually. Save this, and we'll go ahead and run this here. Okay, so this will come back, and this gives us our standard city, name, age, all that kind of stuff. All right, let's assume that we have additional data when we write a record that we want to make sure is always there. So this could be something simple like, and again, we'll create a new thing here. And this, by the way, you just use default, right? So you just specify this default option within your options when you're writing, and then you can go ahead and say and then specify what you want those defaults to be. All right, so the example it gives you is key 2, which again doesn't sound very exciting. So let's do something like active. All right, so by default, a user is, and let's do this as a Boolean. So by default, we want there to be an item that says active equals true, right? So that is always going to be part of the system for us, or part of that item for us. And then maybe we want to do something else, like we might want to say, I don't know, I'll do, how about we do login attempts or something like that. Oops, 0. Okay, so we want these values by default to show up in this record. The only ones we're specifying here, though, are these. So there's no overlap there. So we didn't write anything, we didn't write active, we didn't write login attempts. None of that stuff has been there. We just care about these records being written and then these as defaults. All right, and I'll explain why this is important in a second, but essentially I'm going to clear this. I'm going to go ahead and run this again, and then this is going to write that record to us, and then you're going to notice that we've got some extra values in here. So now our active is set to true, login attempts is set to 0, city, name, and age. All right, this is why this is really cool. One, I might just want to have a bunch of data that I need to write that I want to separate out from my normal object that I'm writing in. So when I do my new user creation, I've got these default values that I always want to get set. But this is what makes it very cool. If I go in and I say, and I'm going to actually change this to Jane Doe, so that we see it as a different record, and I'll say object test 1. So this will be a completely new record that we're writing into the system. Well, for some reason, we want, and let's say login, I'm going to do this. I'm going to say active here, and rather than setting active to true, we're going to set active to false. Maybe Jane hasn't activated her account for some reason, but default is still true. And the reason why I would do this is, again, I wouldn't expect you to write this or to hard code this here, right? Like this would be data coming in from somewhere else. This would be from a post or some sanitized input that now I'm writing into the database. So I can set the active to false here. So this will override the default. So assuming that this works, as it should, I'm going to go ahead and run data again. This is going to create, oh, actually, if anybody noticed, it's actually returning, oh no, this worked. I was thinking I was querying it again. No, this is just returning this. So now we see that the country is USA, active is false, login attempts is 0, which is the default, and the rest of the information is the same. So this is just a really handy way to do something where I'm passing in some object that may have more data, that may be more descriptive, that fills out more of the information that I need, but then in other cases it doesn't necessarily have that data, and I want to make sure that that data is going to exist. There's a number of different use cases. I think we explain it pretty well here as to why you might want to do some of these things, and what some of the different options are, and how some of the overrides work and so forth. If you do try to update a default array, there's like some deep merging that goes on. So there's some interesting things that you can do. And then also what's cool is, let's say that you just want to set a default value for a simple scalar object or a scalar value, right? So you don't have a nested object there. You can just use this method here, which will give you the ability to set a default value for when you don't necessarily have a nested key that you can reference. Okay, so a couple cool things there. There's so many other things to get to. The last thing I just want to show everybody before we sign off is the idea of collections, because this is one of those things that I think it becomes a little bit more, it's maybe a little harder to grok, because we are in fact using DynamoDB behind the scenes. So people sort of like, if you know DynamoDB, you're probably thinking about it in terms of PKs and SKs, primary keys and or partition keys and sort keys, and that's basically what it is. But we just try to shortcut it for you as much as we possibly can. So we have a whole section in here about collections, and essentially the idea behind collections is that they group items together. Think of it as a folder file system. It's essentially a partition key. So anything that has a collection name, you're putting that into a bucket, right? So think about like you created a folder on your computer called users, and then all of the records, all of the items that go in that folder, or all the items under that partition, you're putting as separate documents within that folder. So think about it that way. Hopefully that's an easier way to sort of grok how some of these indexes work. So essentially what we've done is we've just used the colon to create a namespace, to separate your namespace and your key for you. So in this example here, we're saying users colon. So users is the collection. So what this is going to open up a whole bunch of powers for searching and some of these other things. And then whatever comes after that is going to be the key, which in DynamoDB, if you're familiar with DynamoDB, that becomes the sort key. All right, that's it. You just do that, and then it's a normal item after that, right? So same attributes, you have all the same capabilities, nothing changes. There's no difference between an item that's in a collection versus an item that is just a simple object. And then the idea is that if you want to retrieve a value from a collection, then this is where you use that same format. You would say users colon and the name that you're doing there. Again, referencing this back to DynamoDB, this is essentially just this is your partition key and your sort key, splitting up and being referenced to those two different things there. So hopefully that makes sense. I'll show a couple more examples here, or we'll put this into practice and show you how you can then use the idea of getting items and how you can query against the collections and some of the cool things that we can do with that. So we are getting close to time, so let me jump over to that quickly and show you how that works. Okay, so we have Jane Doe and we have John Doe in the system. So I'm actually going to go into our table here. And we now have these all listed. I'm just going to select these and delete these so that our database doesn't have anything in it right now. And I'm going to go back over to my code. All right, so let's actually write a couple of records into the system. So I'm going to get rid of these defaults. We don't need these right now, and we don't need the active there. We're just going to want Jane, and we are going to do this: users colon Jane at doe.com. Like this, and then we also want to write another user. The other thing you can do, and I just mentioned this quickly, get back to my thing here. The other thing you can do quickly, or that you can do, is when you set items, you can actually set multiple items as well. There's a limitation here, though, that when you set multiple items, you have to set the entire item. So we can't do upserts. DynamoDB doesn't let you do upserts with their update API or with their batch API. There is some weird things you can do. I don't want to get into it. There's some weird things you can do where essentially you can do it with like a particle or whatever it is, but we've played around with some ideas, and it's not great. So the limitation essentially is if you're writing new items, then you can go ahead and write as many new items as you want to. Up to 25 per batch, but you can write 25 items. Things like default work and some of these other things, those will work as well when you're doing the batch items, because it just merges the data because it's a one-time thing. But you can do that. But if you are doing upsearch and you want to just manipulate some of the values, then you've got to do them as individual updates. That's a limitation of DynamoDB that unfortunately we have to deal with, and maybe someday that won't be a limitation anymore. So anyways, so we're going to set users as Jane Doe, and the other thing I like to do, by the way, is whenever you use some sort of a key in your for your primary key, or for the key of your data item, I like to make sure that it's duplicated, especially if it's something important, and it should be something useful. A lot of people would do like users colon 1 2 3 4 5. If you do users colon 1 2 3 4 5, what does the 1 2 3 4 5 mean? If that's the ID of the user, then just write 1 2 3 or user dash 1 2 3 4 5, because there's no reason to put that into a collection, because that 1 2 3 4 5 probably isn't going to do you any good unless you want to bring back a list of users sorted by their user ID. So it's generally better to use something that you can filter on, and it's not really a filter, it's technically you're searching on the index, but there's some capabilities that you have there, and I'll show you where it's actually kind of cool in a second here. But so anyways, I like to duplicate the information. So again, the key of the collection, or in the collection, should be a useful reference that you can sort on, or that you can search for. You can do a begins with search, or that you can search in between. Like, it should be a useful thing. If not, putting it in a collection doesn't make a ton of sense. Now, there are other things you can do too, where you can just use the user ID maybe as the key, and you don't need to do that as a collection. You just do that as this is the user ID, and then you can use labels, which work as GSIs, and you can actually access data another way, which I think we're kind of out of time here. So let me show you this quickly. We'll do another video later. We'll get into labels and some of those other things. Okay, so let's see. So I'm creating the Jane Doe one here, and I'm also going to create a John Doe one as well. So John, he is 31, and his email is John Doe like this, and his user is going to be John Doe like that. All right, I am not going to spit the results of that back. Instead, I'm going to save those two records, and I am going to then query on users : star. So that wildcard, what should happen here is, assuming I didn't make any mistakes, is it should write both of those records, and then it will return those items. So now I have those two items separated back, and if I do results.items, I'll get more clarity there. I'm going to go ahead and comment these out so that we don't get those, and run that again. Okay, so now we should see that we have Jane Doe and we have John Doe, john@doe.com, and we've got their different information, and it's coming back as an array of items. And then you can change this based on limit and some of those other things. So if I just wanted to get Jane's record back, I would have to do users::jane@doe.com. If I run this, I'll just get that one back. But here's what's really cool. Oops, did I spell it wrong? users::jane@doe.com. What did I do? Oops. Everything was going so well. Users@jane@doe. Oh, did I spell it wrong? It's weird. So I should, if I want to access this key directly, let me try that again. I must have done something wrong, or I'm losing my mind. Try that again. Clear. I don't know why that's not working, because that should bring back that one particular record. So I don't know, but essentially, it was really weird. Extra in there or something. Well, anyways, what I was going to show that would be cool here is the fact that you can do things like these wildcards, and this allows you to bring back multiple records based off of searching. So I type in J, and it will pick up both users that start with J. If I was to type in JO like this and query that, then this should just bring back the one John Doe because of that. And I'm really curious why John at doe.com, why that's not bringing something back. Because it totally should, but for some reason it seems to be undefined. So I'm not sure why that's not working, because that should. Maybe because the @ symbol or something in there is causing a problem. But anyways, I'll look into that. But essentially I wanted to give you the overall view of sort of playing around with data and some of the things that are possible there. So it is a very, very powerful abstraction on top of DynamoDB. There's a lot of things that you can do here. Again, we talked about the atomic counters. We talked about the existent checks. We didn't go through removing items, but again, pretty simple, data.remove, and you just specify the value and it removes it. And then there's, and we didn't even show data.on. So there's some interesting things you can do where you're actually listening for an event to happen. We are over, but let me just show you this quickly because I didn't even get to it. So when you have your data expressed like this, you can go ahead and write a data.on, oops, like this. And then what you want to do is, we'll just say when anything happens, we want to fire off this, we'll call it an event here, and we will log our event like this, and then save this with that. Okay, so now we've created this data.on. Now this, by the way, this is running on our server, because this is where we would be listening, or I say server, but this is running in the cloud. But this essentially is running in the cloud, and this is listening now for any changes to the data here. So if we went and actually made a change to the data, so let me do this like this. I'll go into our dashboard here. We've got these records like this. I'm going to change Jane's age to 31. I will save this. So this just fired off a change event. And so now we see that we have this updated event here, and we see that this is what the item is now, the current state of the item with her age being 31, and then the previous state with it being 30. So you can build entire workflows based off of this, asynchronous processing, things like that. So anyways, I hope this was helpful. I don't know if people were commenting. Apologies. It looks like we did have one. Anyways, but again, I'm not sure how this is all connected. I will figure this out for next time. But I hope you enjoyed this. You can watch this back. Love any feedback that you have on the product, on the way that data works, and some of those things. So anyways, I appreciate it, and we will see you next time. So